Alright, so today for the first time I'm going to be showing how to do a laptop hinge repair using JB Weld or an epoxy. JB Weld works really well. The only thing is if you leave this in the sun or somewhere where it gets really hot, the epoxy will actually soften up and then it can kind of come out pretty easily. JB Weld does take about 15 hours to set. So keep that in mind. If you're going to do this, you're not going to be able to use your computer for about 15 hours. All right, so anyways, the first thing you're going to want to do, every model is different, so keep that in mind. This is for, I'm working on this model, but the idea is similar on every model you work on. If you have cables like this that go along underneath, let me zoom in. Right, so of course first thing you're going to want to do is remove the frame or the bezel, and every laptop's different. Some you can't even remove the frame, or it's like glass or something, so keep that in mind. This won't work with every single model, but I figured might as well show it since I'm going to do it. So you can see these wires going here, all right, and then wires going here. Keep in mind that depending on the design, some of them, the wires will actually go underneath the hinges and things like that. So if you were to epoxy this down and the cables go underneath, keep in mind that if anything breaks in the screen area, you're going to have to end up replacing the entire screen or the screen assembly or something like that. So keep in mind of what could happen if it breaks again or if it doesn't hold well. This hinge kind of has a lot of area to work with. Usually the best design is if the hinge is kind of longer up this way. So that way there's more leverage. This kind of design isn't too good, and that's why it breaks. The reason is, like, if you hold something like this and try and bend it this way, it's really easy. But if you hold it this way and you try and twist it this way, it's really hard because you don't have any leverage. So as you can see on this design, all the leverage is kind of just on this thin bar. So when the screen opens and closes, it's trying to hold on to that little bar like this, and that's why these kind of hinges break really easily. Everyone's trying to make these thinner designs and then they fail. So this, for a better design, should actually go up this way, not sideways this way. But anyways, as you can see, this side also, it's missing some screws here, so those also got ripped out. It helps to get some Loctite and then add it to the screws and then tighten them back down so that they don't come loose. If the screws come loose, that can also cause it to like break out more. So right now, if you have a screw holding tight, it moves like this. But if it's loose, then it like will pry the thing out like this, and that breaks the plastic around it. And that's how you end up with these broken plastic areas here. Okay. And then before you do this, of course, you also want to make sure that your computer still turns on. So we already checked this computer turns on, the screen comes on, all right? Because if you do this and then your screen doesn't work, then you're pretty much screwed, all right? You're going to be stuck with whatever you did on here, okay? So anyways, let me shut down this computer completely and then we'll continue with the process. So we're going to use some JB Weld, all right? And you want to make sure that these cables, right now it's seated properly, but when we kind of lift it to get the JB Weld in there, the cable might lift out. So it's very important that you're able to seat this back down. All right. So anyways, I rotated the screen this way, so that way the weight of the body of the computer is keeping this in the right position. All right. You don't want the hinge to be kind of tipping over a certain way. But if anything, you can put the epoxy first and then kind of adjust the hinge by kind of putting weight on it. So usually what I do, let me see if I can even show this. So normally the screen would be opened up like this, okay? So as you can see now, the hinge is kind of tipping up. So what I have to do is I have to pull it forward, and I also have to apply downward force on top of here. So while you're tipping it forward, you kind of you pull down on it. Okay, I know it's hard to see what I'm doing, but basically you grab this and then you push down while you're kind of pulling forward, and that helps it put the pressure all on the hinge. Okay, so just like that, and then yeah. So you want to make sure that it's staying flat. You might have to tilt it further than 90 degrees. So here you can see it's tipping forward. So now it's kind of holding the hinge in the right spot. Okay, if it's not, you might have to adjust it a bit more, but there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and zoom back in. Again, we're going to be using JB Weld for this. There are other epoxies, but I found JB Weld, at least right now, works the best. So that's what we're going to use, okay? The other thing you're going to want is we're going to need like the bezel and stuff like that, okay? This one I'm most likely going to have to, okay, actually I can probably fit the bezel in here without taking it back out. So we're going to use this, and then we're also going to use some tape, or you can use, it doesn't have to be tape, you can just use a thin plastic film, even like saran wrap or something will work well. Okay, actually saran wrap might actually work better, but let's go ahead and do it this way. Okay, so the reason saran wrap would work better is because how thin it is. It will conform and let you keep as much glue over the hinge screws as possible. So anyways, we're gonna get, I just use this to stir up the JB Weld. All right, let me put this out of the way. Let me see if I can kind of show everything. So let me zoom out here a bit more. All right, so JB Weld is multiple parts. If you're buying like a bunch of JB Weld, be a little bit generous with the amount of JB Weld you do, because it's always better to have more and then not have enough, and then you have to remix it all while like time is running out for it to set. Okay, so usually the way I measure is I kind of like see how big these little holes are all right, and then I'll just put about close to how much that is with one, and then when you mix the second one, it should be enough to kind of fill the hole as well as fill over the hole and everything that it's going to end up spilling out. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's, on the other side, there's also some broken parts. So we're going to get about as much as 7 of those little screw mount holes. Okay, it's hard to estimate it, but yeah, so that's why you kind of want to do more if you can. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm gonna guess it's gonna be about this much. Okay, again, you can put more just to be safe. I do this a lot, so usually I can estimate it pretty well, but worst case you could always make more again, but it's nice to not have to worry about making more of the epoxy while you're in the middle of trying to get the hinge seated and everything. Okay, so there we go, we got that epoxy there. Now we're going to get the black, and we're going to try and do about the same amount. Okay, so you want to try and get it as close as possible. If you don't get the equivalent amounts, then it might not actually set as well. So there we go, that's probably about right. Okay, it's a little bit difficult to judge because the pile's the way it blobs out. Okay, but just try and get it as close as you can. All right, that looks about right. I think I always end up using more of the black than the white, just because black, I don't know if you guys know, like with clothes and stuff, black makes things look smaller, thinner, because it absorbs the light. So sometimes I end up putting more. So there you go. I think I might have put more black as well on this. So anyways, let's go ahead and stir it up. So the way I stir this up, you can use whatever you want, but I use like a small, like disposable, like I don't really care about this screwdriver. I got so many of these. You can use like a toothpick, but toothpicks end up like breaking. So that's why I use this. All right. And then you just stir them all together just like this. I like to do it on these clear plastic trays just because I get them from like working, like replacing SSDs. So I just have a bunch of these, but at the same time, I can look at the bottom and you can see if it's stirred together properly, all right? So that's why I like using this clear plastic thing. So if you have some clear, like thick plastic packaging or something, it's nice to have that to use for this kind of, thing. You can use whatever though, it doesn't have to be clear black plastic. And then you just kind of stir it together the best you can, okay? All right, just like that. Stir it all up. All right, and then I like to kind of squeegee it all over towards to like the center. Okay, just like that, and then stir it up some more. And then let's check the bottom, and you can see it's still not completely mixed, so let's go ahead and try and get that spot. All right. probably going to end up with a bunch of leftover. If you do this a lot, you can actually like take the leftover and make a sculpture or something with it. I don't know. I haven't been doing that recently. I've been doing stuff with like the magnets, and then I just coat the magnets with this. But there is metal in this, so if you put it on magnets, it actually, the magnet will pull the glue towards it. So that's another thing to watch out for. If the screens have magnets in it, keep that in mind. It's gonna actually, the magnet will pull the epoxy into it. Okay, so we're gonna go over here now. So usually what I like to do, I like using the screwdriver because it's thinner and smaller, so I can actually like get the screwdriver in there and then work the epoxy into the gap. Let me actually see if I can zoom in and show this better. I might have to tilt the screen back for you to see this, but yeah. All right, so I use the screwdriver like that, and you basically just get the epoxy onto the screwdriver. I kind of do that, and then I kind of twist it around to make sure the tail stays all onto the screwdriver, and then just work it into the gap there. If you get too much, go ahead and grab it and then move it over to the next one. Okay, and same thing, kind of just work it into the hole there. So you kind of want to try and make sure it gets a good fit, that it's seated completely properly. And then what we do after we fill all the little holes, we kind of lift the hinge away from the screen a little bit and then drop it down. And that will usually help get the epoxy underneath the hinge as well, and it will get a better fit. So that way it kind of seals not only within the hole there, but also underneath and around it. Okay, so we're just gonna get the epoxy to fill up all these spots. All right, I probably made like way too much, but it's okay. Again, it's better to have more than not enough and then have to redo this. I know the screen's kind of, or the base of the laptop's kind of getting in the way, but yeah, it is what it is. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing. Right, I'm gonna go and do this one as well. Okay, again, and then again, you're gonna want to slightly overfill this, and we're gonna end up covering these little glue spots or the epoxy spots with tape, or again, you can use like Saran wrap or something, and that helps prevent the glue from sticking to the frame. So if we ever need, or the bezel, so if we ever need to take it back out, we can. It won't be an issue. Okay. Right, you want it to slightly overfill a little bit, and going over the edges and everything, because that will help hold it into place. Okay, again, you want to remove all the screws and those little screw mounts if you can, and the plastic debris. I use a toothbrush, and then I use this little air blower thing, and then I just blow all the dust out from the little areas here, so that way it can get a good seating. All right. So there we go. We got most of the epoxy in there, and this epoxy will usually hold very strong. If there's not much leverage and there's like empty space here, you can actually put the epoxy over the edges here, or like over this. Just make sure not to get it into the moving part of the hinge. So if you, let me lift this up and show you. So you don't want any epoxy to get in here, otherwise you're not going to be able to open and close the hinge. Excuse me. But down here, you can actually put the epoxy there, and that will hold it down onto the frame very strong. So when I usually have excess epoxy that I made, I'll usually fill up that area just to get a better hold. All right. Also, if you have those little alignment tabs, like these little circle ones, if those broke off, you can put glue in those holes to help hold it better as well. These kind of just help the hinge so that your screen won't slide around with the hinge. It will actually keep it in the right position. Okay, so now that we got all the epoxy in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up the laptop base to separate the hinge. Let me zoom out and see if you can see this. Okay, so I have my hand under here, so I'm gonna lift this up. All right, and as you can see, the epoxy can kind of flow underneath, but you want to be careful doing that if you have all these cables, that they don't get all popped out. All right, let me zoom in some more. Oops, and then I'm going to show you close up what it looks like when you go ahead and lift the hinge away from the computer. So here you can see, all right, So you're basically doing this, and then you can kind of move it left and right too, a little bit away from the actual spot. And this will help get the epoxy underneath the hinge, okay? And it will help get a better grip underneath onto the laptop. All right, if you want, you can lift it up, and then you can use the screwdriver or whatever tool you're using to spread the epoxy, and then you can use that to kind of get it into the gaps a little bit better. So while you're kind of lifting it up, you can do this, okay? And do that on all of them. And that will help also get the epoxy into the other areas so that it gets a much stronger hold onto the base, okay? Just like that. And we just let this drop back down. Okay, I think my one customer's here to drop off their computer, so I might have to pause the video for a bit. But that's what you do, okay? And again, when you put the epoxy, you want to have it like slightly raised away from the hinge. You don't want it completely flat, because when you go ahead and put the tape on top and things, you want it actually to spread out over the hinge to get a stronger hold. All right, so just do it like that. Yeah, I think my customer's here. So yeah, just keep doing that. I'm gonna get a little more over here. The other side with the screws already on it, you probably don't have to worry too much. Oh, I think they're looking at the kittens outside. Okay, so just like that. All right, let me go check with my customers that are outside right now, and I'll be back. But basically that's what you want, and then you're gonna have to put some tape over this and then put the hinge back in place. Make sure that the hinge is holding itself down, and then you'll put the bezel over on top after you put the tape, and that will make sure it stays flush and everything. All right, so I'll be back. Let me go check on my customer outside, and I'll see you guys in a bit. All right, I'm back. Hopefully the epoxy didn't set too much. Okay, good. It's still a bit liquidy because I still have to finish this. I was out talking with the customers. They were admiring the cats and kittens. So let's see here. All right, so we're gonna continue adding the epoxy to these last few screws over on this side. Okay, let me get my epoxy out of the way. Be careful not to drop these stuff on the screen. Usually if the screen is like glossy, it's okay. You can kind of wipe it up. Not too bad, but on these matte screens it's a bit more difficult. You'd have to use like isopropyl rubbing alcohol or something, so be very careful with that, okay? You don't want to get your screen all covered with the cloudiness of the epoxy, okay? So it's very careful. You have to like keep spinning it around like this to keep the epoxy from kind of dripping. All right. And if it's too liquidy, you can wait a little bit for it to like harden up a little bit. Okay. So right now, I don't know if you can tell, but because I was out there talking with the customer for a bit, the epoxy is a little bit more solid. It's best if you do the detailed areas when it's more liquidy, so that way it can somewhat flow into place. The epoxy doesn't really flow. It kind of just stays a blob. But when you kind of pick it up and like how I was doing earlier to lift the hinge up and things like that, then it kind of will help it flow into the gaps. So you kind of want to do it while it's more liquidy if you can. All right, we're going back over to this side, and again, let's kind of just move it around a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. Oops, sorry, I was going over too far. Okay, and then again, you kind of just move it around to get the epoxy to flow underneath. And since I have all this excess epoxy that I don't really need anymore, again, I'm gonna put it in this area to hold the hinge down onto the rest of the laptop. Okay, so just like this. I have a lot of excess actually, so this might be too much excess. Let's see if I can fill that whole gap and how much I'll have left. Okay, so we're gonna just fill this gap here with the epoxy, and that will help hold these two pieces together a little bit better down. And you can also go up closer to the screen, oops, sorry, like this, but you don't want to glue the screen down, of course. Though this kind of epoxy, you can cut it with a razor blade. So if you work at it long enough, you can actually just cut the epoxy if it ends up like getting stuck to the screen or something like that. Okay, Again, you can cut it and then you can use heat to kind of soften it up. So that's how I work it if I ever need to take this stuff back out. Okay, so we got the last blob here. We're gonna just go ahead and stick that all on there. Okay, looks good. And there we go. Okay, so we should be good to go. Now we're gonna cover up the blobs of epoxy or glue with some tape or plastic. As I was saying, you can use plastic wrap if you want, whatever you got, whatever works. Okay, the main thing is just so it doesn't stick onto the bezel that when we go ahead and put that back in. Okay, I'm trying to get all this epoxy out. There we go. Okay, let me clean up the epoxy stuff I have, and I'll be back to show you when I cover the pieces with tape. All right, see you guys in a bit. So I'm back. So now what we're gonna do, just get some tape, all right? And it doesn't matter any kind of tape you got. But yeah, this kind of thin tape is kind of nice. So what you're gonna do is just cut it to be a little bit bigger than you want it to. You can actually cover the entire area here as long as it's not blocking the clips of the computer. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to cut it thin like this, and then I'm just going to cut like little squares out of that just to cover the epoxy spots. All right, so the way you do that, you get this over and then you get like an edge of it down. Okay, just like this, and then while you're holding that, you can go ahead and drop that tape into place, and there you go. Cover the little epoxy spot like that. Okay, so we're basically just going to do that with all of them. And go ahead and go down on this one as well. Okay, this one I left not really a square shape because it had an extra piece of the tail there, so we're just going to do it like that. Okay, so we're just going to cover all the epoxy spots just like that. Hopefully you'll be able to see. Let me zoom out a little bit, that might help. Okay. All right. Some more of this. So this one is because it's like a long line. You can actually put like a long line, but also because it goes over the hinge area, I'm gonna have to cut a notch in it just so I can get that to fit over the hinge. Okay. So I kind of cut a notch here. Okay, it's hard to see, but basically we're gonna use that. If you want, you can also just cut multiple squares, and that works as well. But we're gonna go ahead and get that on. All right, and there we go. So that little notch, oops, sorry, that little notch is going over the hinge now. Okay. All right, we're almost there. So let's go ahead and get this last one here, and then the other two. I know it's hard to see, I'm sorry, because the bezel is in the way, but I have to do it that way, otherwise it's gonna end up. Okay, so the other issue, there's some clips here, so you want to be careful with those clips. Okay, so I'm actually gonna have to cut this one a little bit thinner. And we're gonna have to go over from this side, it looks like. You can use tweezers or something to help get this in place easier, but get that in. Again, if you're using something like what do you call, like Saran Wrap, it actually makes it a little bit easier because the Saran Wrap can just bend with the little hinge or these little clips. So even if you cover all those little clips, there's a good chance that the clips will just go over in anyways, and it should hold it in place. So if you want, you can use Saran Wrap. The only thing with Saran Wrap is it's so thin that, oops, let me see, that it makes it difficult to position because it'll just fold over on itself. That's why I like use this tape, which is really thin, but at the same time it's somewhat holds itself together. Okay, so there we go. So we got that. Let's go ahead and zoom out. Okay, zoom out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is get the bezel back on. Okay, so again, this varies from computer to computer, but you're gonna do this. All right, just get the bezel in the best you can. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and snap the top end of this bezel in first, and then I'll worry about the other side later. Okay, just like this. Okay, get everything lined up. There you go. So it actually went into place on its own. Go ahead and snap everything down. Snap the center pieces down. All right. So usually what I do, I don't usually leave it open like this. So let me show you what I do. I was showing earlier how I applied like pressure downwards on top to close it. So that's how I get it all back together. Okay, so what I do, let me actually make sure all these clips are good. Seems like they're good. You can leave it like this, but I like to close it to make sure the edges and everything line up. So what I do is I put downward pressure on it like this, and then I close it, okay? So while putting pressure on it to keep the hinge firmly connected to the screen, all right? I want to keep the pressure over the hinge, okay? Again, this is a little tricky, so if you're not really sure, you can just leave it standing up like that. Just make sure it doesn't get knocked over, all right? I'm gonna clip all of this back into place as well. There we go. And then, so here you can see now that the screen is closed like that. And you wanna, of course, get all the little hinge clips and everything in. So it looks like all the clips are good to go. And then another thing I like to do, you can actually get like a very thin piece of cardboard, like this kind of cardboard, not regular box cardboard. You can stick it in the gap, and then you can actually tape over the top so that it kind of keeps a pressure over this. But on this model, it was holding together really well. So I'm actually gonna leave it like this, and it looks like it will hold well. So just make sure all the edges are nice and aligned, and that's pretty much it. So hopefully this video helped you guys. If it did, please like, subscribe, share my channel with others. If it helped you save a bunch of money, please consider throwing a little my way. These kinds of videos do eat into my business, so it's nice if you guys can help out and keep my business going, even though I'm losing business through actual repairs. But yeah, anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. All right, let's drop this. Bye.